We live in a time where cinema is dominated by huge blockbusters with the style, substance, and subtlety of a pissed off 5-year-old with crayons. Whether it's the latest superhero movie telling the same story we've seen 1,000 times or an uninspired IP film, it tends to be all the same. Generic, big budget, action, CGI-infused slop just milking franchises for what they're worth. Now, there are a few exceptions here and there, but it tends to be the same thing on repeat. And box office returns are starting to catch up with the drawbacks of modern cinema. But occasionally a filmmaker will come along and use the budget given to them to tell a story that is not only important, but of such a high bar and quality that it restores your faith in the dwindling light that is blockbuster cinema. 3 years after a relatively disappointing outing by Christopher Nolan standards in Tenet, he has come along with what many are already calling his best film yet and one of the most important films of recent time, if not the most important film of recent time. Oppenheimer is a film so layered in its complex characters, its haunting story, and social and moral dilemmas that no single person should ever have to bear the burden of, as well as an ending that will have you leaving the theater and seeking the nearest bomb shelter. Christopher Nolan has broken free of the constraints of modern Hollywood to deliver one of the best films of recent years. So let's dive in deep on Oppenheimer and why it is a complete masterpiece. So Christopher Nolan, this guy is just a master of his craft. Whether it's Memento, The Dark Knight, Inception, or Oppenheimer, this guy just tells stories in a way that just works. Now, many of Nolan's films have a strong emphasis on action amongst all the complexity. Oppenheimer has no action. It's just 3 hours of dialogue posing interesting questions with an extraordinary man in an extraordinary time. It doesn't rely on explosions to keep you engaged, which is ironic as the film is about the creation of a bomb. Now look, some people might find this film boring. I could already see it happening now because, like I said, there is no action. It's long and it's a film where it encourages you to think about the dilemma these people were faced with. But these days, if it's not a 30-second horizontal video of a woman trying to be an NPC on TikTok, people get bored because they have no attention span.
Slay, huh?
And those people are going to have no problem calling Oppenheimer boring. But that's honestly one of the reasons I appreciate Oppenheimer. It doesn't cave to modern audiences. It just tells the story of J Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, with some creative liberties. It doesn't try to add this absurd action-based twist to keep audiences engaged because it doesn't need to. The writing, the character work, the performances, the challenge, the implications of this story bring are more than enough. Anyway, a major issue in some of Nolan's films are to do with the sound mixing and often overshadowing the dialogue. The Dark Knight Rises and Tenet in particular being the worst offenders, especially Tenet. Oppenheimer definitely doesn't do away with this problem, but it kind of embraces it in a way that complements this story and the particular scenes in which the sound takes center stage. Sound, in a way, is its own character in this film. It's the star of the show. It didn't drown out the dialogue as bad as Tenet, but it is absolutely a loud film. And that's despite the fact it's dialogue driven as opposed to action, which in itself makes for a really interesting watch. There are scenes where the chaos of the world as well as the psychological implications post-bomb are incredibly showcased to get you into Oppenheimer's headspace. Nolan uses visuals to emphasize this as well, but the sound must be given credit here as it's equally as effective in helping the audience get into the mind of a man carrying such a heavy burden. The music is also harrowing at times. Ludwig Göransson, I've definitely butchered that, but he returns as composer from Tenet and did an incredible job to aid the visual storytelling. Now, one of the key metrics when it comes to Christopher Nolan films, at least in my experience, is the rewatch factor. The Prestige, Memento, Inception, all in my opinion, some of his best work. Every single time I roll credits on those three films, I want to watch them again. Oppenheimer is no different. I'm seeing a lot of people say that this is Nolan's best film, and whilst I could definitely see that, the fact that when credits rolled on Oppenheimer, I just wanted to get another ticket and watch it again speaks volumes for how many layers this film had. Nolan just provided the care, the vision, and the finesse of a super talented auteur, but managed to do it with a $100 million budget It just goes to show that you don't need to spend stupid amounts of money, by filmmaking terms anyway, to try and make something truly incredible. Yes, Disney, that was pointed at you. You don't need to spend $300 million to ruin the Indiana Jones franchise. Anyway, Oppenheimer is uniquely Christopher Nolan, and it's without question one of his best. So when it comes to film, perfect is a term that is near on impossible to achieve no matter how good something is, but man does Oppenheimer push that barrier. The way this film showcases the journey through interwoven timelines of the story of a man that goes from quantum physicist to the most important man in the world is nothing short of extraordinary. Nolan plays expertly into the moral dilemma of offering the human race a solution to end the war, but as a byproduct of that, create something that could potentially ensure peace for humanity, or at the same time, offer humanity a tool that will ensure its own destruction. The film rides a really fine line in making the arms race such a compelling journey, with the implications of winning the arms race lingering over the characters' heads. Yes, you can create a weapon of mass destruction to ensure peace, but what does that creation actually do once the war is ended? This is where the film really hit home for me. It's that riding of the line of what this creation means for humanity. And I believe that to be the film's strongest asset, the way it makes you think with these huge questions, and it also helps to highlight the weight and scope of the situation that these people were faced with. There is a line by Matt Damon's Leslie Groves when he and Oppenheimer begin recruiting for the Manhattan Project, where he says in an outburst that this is the single most important event in human history, or something along those lines. Which is a relatively simple line, but it's more to do with the idea that that's not hyperbole. This really was one of, if not the most important moments in human history, and the fact that it all pretty much fell on the shoulders of one man is absolutely incredible. This is why film is so important. It provides a lens into moments in time that people would otherwise overlook. That's why when I see headlines saying that this is one of the most important films of recent time, I completely agree. Because not only does it highlight why film is so important and impactful, but it helps highlight that we're potentially staring down the barrel of the terrifying ramifications of this creation that the film plays with. Now, one thing I appreciate about this film amongst many is that despite it being dialogue heavy, there is a lot of show and don't tell going on. Visuals are key in showing us as the audience what these characters are thinking. Instead of an outpouring of thoughts and emotion from Oppenheimer, we get subtle or not so subtle visual cues that clue us in on what this man is thinking. A lot of the film gives us visualizations of the scientific elements of Oppenheimer's thoughts, which helps to show us how he thinks. In a way, using Oppenheimer's brain as a vessel for the audience as opposed to falling back on traditional storytelling techniques. The final scene does this to expert effect as well. The ending of this film is one of the most haunting and terrifying I have seen from a film in recent years. We see Oppenheimer and Einstein have a conversation about essentially every major question this film posed, and we get visual cues of Oppenheimer's thinking of the future. We see modern nuclear missiles spreading throughout the Earth, essentially answering the film's posed questions, as the film, as said earlier, often rides the line of developing a solution to end the war as a good thing. But what are the consequences of said solution once the war is over? Will it result in peace, or did Oppenheimer just give the human race the key to destroy itself? And we see the visual representation through Oppenheimer's thoughts of what that could look like in future. And then the film ends, and it lets us sit with that. As we live in the modern day where the threat of nuclear war is all over the headlines, the timing of this film absolutely increases its impact. Another example of this film showing and not telling comes in the form of the scientists who worked on the Manhattan Project, as it wasn't just Oppenheimer. And we get to see their reactions to the bombs successfully being dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. There is a scene in particular where Jack Quaid's character shows relief that their creation worked, but at the same time shows absolute terror at the fact that their creation worked. Realizing what it means has happened, he offers a reluctant handshake with no words spoken that speak 1,000 words. Again, this film plays with the moral dilemma that these men were faced with so well, and the way Nolan chose to capture that was simply phenomenal. They were successful, But when they realized what their success actually meant, it's almost too much for them to bear. The film takes great care in showcasing the triumphs of the Manhattan Project, but doesn't pull any punches on showing you the sins of the Manhattan Project. The film doesn't glamorize anything. The people in this story feel real and act like you'd think real people would, given the situation that they're in. Also, the decision to not show the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and letting the scientists' reactions fuel that news of it happening was another cherry on top. Now, the final hour of this film, I can see some people losing themselves in it. It focuses on depositions between Strauss and Oppenheimer that have weaved throughout the film, showing the treatment of the scientists post-war as well as Oppenheimer dealing with communist sympathizer accusations. It almost felt like an ending within an ending. Real Return of the King-like, and I think it definitely worked. This was really where Robert Downey Jr. got to shine as Strauss, accents, Australian, weird, I know, just forgive me. But we also get an incredible scene that takes place between President Truman and Oppenheimer about basically the bearing of the weight of the bombing. And it all bleeds perfectly into the terrifying final scene with Einstein. Now look, you can't sing this film's praises without talking about the performances. Cillian Murphy, yes, it's not Cillian Murphy, stop driving me crazy, has a career best performance as J Robert Oppenheimer, delivering nuance and the ability to convey strong dialogue as well as display expressions that say more than words ever could. You'll notice from the trailer alone exactly what I mean when I say that, but with the film's context, it just hits hard every single time. I expect he'll get a Best Actor nomination and could even win it. This film has an endless list of actors that clearly were just happy to be there. We're talking recent Academy Award winners, multiple of them, jumping on screen for a matter of seconds, taking a back seat, which really goes to show that 1, the script for this film was looking very, very good from the start, which comes as no surprise seeing the final product, but it also goes to show just how much people want to work with Christopher Nolan. Now, one of the reasons I think Oppenheimer stands out so much as such an incredible film is large in part due to the current cinema landscape that we find ourselves in. Not to detract from this film, it's absolutely incredible, obviously, but I can't stress how nice it was to go to the movie theater to watch a big film and not walk out thinking, man, that sucked. I mean, take a look at my channel. Majority of my recent videos have been shitting on major releases, and aside from Across the Spider-Verse, it's been pretty shitty going to the movies recently. But the good news is, most of these films are underperforming. As it turns out, people aren't turning up to watch shit, but audiences will go and watch your movie if it's actually good. I know, mind-blowing stuff. If only Hollywood got that memo. Hollywood is in a very dangerous place right now between the continuous box office flops of major films, the blockbuster slate being dominated by an out-of-touch clown house, and the studios not paying their writers or actors properly, leading to strikes. We need films like Oppenheimer now more than ever before. People love Christopher Nolan as a filmmaker because he doesn't just make a film to make a film. He finds something that he's passionate about and tells the story in uniquely his way. We live in a cinema slate of studio-based IP-driven films that try to emulate one another and take advantage of what is popular. Oppenheimer goes against the grain of modern Hollywood in every single way. It's a film that isn't catered to the majority. It doesn't have a digestible runtime. It doesn't have action. It doesn't have big CGI sky beam battles. It doesn't inject modern identity politics into something where it just has no place. It's a biopic that reflects its time period, with something to say on where the human race has been and where the human race is going. It's not a biopic that has modern day garbage shoehorned into it that completely breaks its own logic. I don't remember the last time I was still thinking about a major blockbuster long after the credits rolled. Smaller indie projects have had this effect on me recently, but a major release? I can't even remember. The phrase "they just don't make them like this anymore" is something that we basically say whenever we watch a film back in cinema's golden ages. But that phrase is something I thought of immediately when reflecting on Oppenheimer. They don't make films like this anymore. So the fact that Nolan has managed to do it and do it so well, maybe creating his best film in his already impressive filmography, is just incredible and exactly what this industry needs. So to bring this one home, Oppenheimer is a Christopher Nolan masterpiece. A film so deeply layered and complex that it's impossible to not be entertained unless you have the attention span of a fork. It doesn't rely on a $300 million budget. It doesn't rely on action. It doesn't rely on CGI or superheroes. Instead, it focuses on story, dialogue, character, visual flair, breathtaking performances, complex questions, and moral dilemmas that will keep you thinking long after the credits roll. The best scenes of Oppenheimer are the ones that rest in their subtlety, letting the broader questions the film poses ponder in the viewer's minds as well as the characters. It's a masterclass in filmmaking from start to finish. 3-hour runtime, and I wouldn't take a second of that 3 hours away. Oppenheimer may very well be Christopher Nolan's magnum opus, and if you ask me, is a masterpiece.